Yeah, my name's Amy. I write Nearly Knowledgeable blog, which is all about Shropshire, the kind of the interplay between Shropshire folklore and history. And that really is going to be the theme of today's talk, is how we can look at folklore, and particularly some of the darker elements of folklore, and understand the past. Um, the thing is about Shropshire is it is an absolutely beautiful place. There's no doubt about it. Whether you're in North Shropshire, South Shropshire, East Shropshire, or West Shropshire, or somewhere in the middle, it is an absolutely beautiful place. However, it feels, especially having moved away and interacted with people from outside of Shropshire, it feels like a very hidden place. It feels like there's a lot of secrets that are kind of there to be unfolded. Often, I think, because people just don't know where it's from. When I was at university, I remember saying to someone I was from Shropshire, and they asked me if I was Scottish. So there's quite a distance in where they both are. And I think that hiddenness, that's almost secrecy in Shropshire, makes it so special. Mary Webb once eloquently described Shropshire as having a permanence, a continuity that made the lapse of centuries seem like moments, which is a beautiful, beautiful statement. And I think it really conveys the history of the area. Shropshire has been important in every major historical period, from the earliest incidences through to the power of the Marcher Lords, and even beyond, when the fires of industry were lighting up the landscape. Beyond a lot of Shropshire's beauty, its blue remembered hills, is a darker story. And these darker stories run like veins and capillaries across the land, and they influence the way we see the area and also influence folklore. Now, there is a tendency, I think, sometimes in life to shy away from these stories, particularly the darker aspects of life. But with this folklore being so rich and so varied, including poltergeists, ghosts, goblins, there's even a couple of goblins, and the archfiend himself, we can learn so much about how people from the past interacted with, you know, their world and their thoughts and their fears. These stories, I think, then shouldn't be shied away from. They are fundamental to our understanding of those who came before us. They give us insight into the challenges and the troubles that they faced. And unfortunately, with a lot of them, some of the sad situations they faced, they're more than just superstition or entertainment. They are a window to isolation, to fears, and even the experiences of a whole community. Think, and I've said it before, that ghosts are so much more than just ghosts. They're never given the credit they deserve. They are conduits for emotions. And I think that when we explore these stories, we can understand so much about our history and our heritage. We're going to look today at some of Shropshire's ghost stories, and also one of my favourite things, Shropshire's satanic folklore. And it's going to help us understand what life was like in this county. Some of the stories I'm going to discuss today have quite a tragedy towards them. They deal with aspects of life such as death, murder, and unfortunately some abuse. And it might make for difficult listening at times, but these are the stories that often are forgotten. And I think that it means that they're so important to be told. And that's why the dark folklore is so important to be told, because it can teach us so much, and it can help us understand the unfortunate circumstances of people in the past. Now, I want to begin with a story that links to this time of the year, and it takes place on Halloween, which was known in the past as All Saints' Eve. Now, in Shropshire, All Saints' Eve has a number of associations with divination, particularly love divination. So, for example, in the past, eager young women who maybe didn't have a partner or a husband or someone that caught their eye would, on Halloween Eve, wait until midnight, and they would stand in front of the mirror. They would let their long hair flow loose. In one hand, they'd have an apple. In the other hand, they'd have their brush. And they'd be brushing their hair whilst gazing into the mirror and eating from this apple. And it's said that after a short time, maybe less than a minute, they would see an apparition in the mirror. Now, this would either be the lover, the man that they would going to marry. And thus, if it was the case that they saw that man, they would have to quickly look over their left shoulder to avoid any harm coming to him. The only other option was that you would see a coffin. And if you saw that coffin, it meant that you were destined to live alone and to be a spinster and to never find love. So these women were going and doing this, and it was something that was practiced into the 1900s. And there was a fear that if you didn't look over your shoulder and when you saw your love, that some evil would befall them, or perhaps they too would end up in a coffin. And as I said, there's lots of different love divination that can be used on Halloween night. But there is a darker form of divination that actually takes place at Cherbury, in Cherbury churchyard. And it has much darker consequences than seeing the person you're going to marry. So it was believed that if you went to Cherbury churchyard on Halloween and you walked around the building, anti-clockwise, of course, 12 times, at midnight, you would hear a roll call of all those people that were to die the following year. Now, that is an incredibly powerful thing. You would have that secret knowledge. You would know the people that were to die in that year. And folklore says that this was actually tested in 1788, where two drunken men, they were drunk, they came up with a scheme to use this to their advantage. So they went to the churchyard just before midnight and they completed the ritual. And they were hoping that if they heard the names of the people who would die, what they would do is they would write up a load of debts with them, take all their money, but then of course they wouldn't have to pay them back because they were all going to be dead by the end of the year. So clever, it's big brain thinking. So they completed the ritual and waited. And soon enough, when it became midnight, a raspy voice called out the list of all those people that were to die in that parish that year. However, to their horror, it called out a familiar name. The name was the brother of the one man and the best friend of the other. So quick as a flash, they ran through the village to their companion's house, banging, banging, banging on the door to try and rouse this man from their slumber. When he eventually opened the door, he reluctantly listened to their frenzied worries and their frenzied kind of calls. He didn't really get the gist of what they were saying, so he asked them to slow it down. And eventually they told him that they knew he was going to die that year. He laughed it off and then quite angrily told them that he was very much alive and they needed to lay off the drink and just bugger off back home. And it was less than a week later that that man was dead. Now, I love this story because it's got everything. It's got a bit of divination, a bit of death. You've got that raspy voice calling out the names of all those who died, but it also demonstrates the rich tradition of divination in Shropshire. And if you want to look into that, there are so many different variations of divination and magic and witchcraft in the area. But it also warns us of what could happen if we abuse this power. It suggests that looking into the future is possible, but it is fraught with danger. And I think that's a really powerful message that is worth knowing at this time of year when the veil is thinner. So now I want us to travel to Shrewsbury, and I want to look at one of Shropshire's actual oldest ghost tales. Now, Shrewsbury itself is really, really bloody haunted. It seems that every corner you go through, every twist and turn, there is a ghost somewhere. Even the shopping centre has a ghost of a phantom milkmaid who was said to wander around saying, "Weight and measure sold I ever, milk and water sold I never." Now, her story is that she was tried for selling watered down milk during the 1600s, and she professed her innocence all the way through the trial. And when they actually sentenced her to death, because it was a very serious thing to water down the milk during history, she said that she would haunt the area until her innocence was proclaimed in and the area was called Raven Meadows, but now it's become a shopping centre. And during the construction of the shopping centre, she was supposedly walking around the building and absolutely terrifying the very, very macho builders. So it's really haunted. There's loads of phantom monks. There's all sorts of ghosts within Shrewsbury. But I want to tell you about Shrewsbury's medieval serial killer, Bloody Jack Blundell. Now, as I said, this is one of Shropshire's oldest ghost tales. It's believed to have been around the 12th or the 13th century, and it has been told consistently throughout until we get to today. There are multiple versions of this tale. There's one where Bloody Jack is an ogre, and it's the idea that he's this inhuman entity that, I think in a way it's trying to make his crimes more palpable. It's trying to make out that, you know, he would do something so terrible because he was an ogre. I prefer not to tell that tale because I think it takes away some of the original message of the story. And it's the original message of the story is the evil that men can do, the evil that humans can do. So this tale takes place at the sandstone castle, Shrewsbury Castle. And during the medieval period, Shrewsbury, like much of the kind of border area, was very, very important and instrumental to the defence of England. And Shrewsbury Castle, very much like Chester Castle or down places down in Herefordshire, were very, very defensive fortifications that were powerful. And they had their own power that in many ways was independent of the king. So it's said that Bloody Jack Blundell, Jack Blundell, was a soldier that worked at the castle. He was very well liked by the other soldiers. He was kind of a bit of the Jack the lad. He got on with everyone, had a bit of a laugh with them, and they respected him. And he eventually was so respected that he was able to get the job of custodian of the castle. And that meant that when other people went away or when the changing of the guards, he actually was there on his own. He had his own room. He had his own keys to the building. He was a very, very powerful man. Unfortunately, Jack Blundell used this power to his advantage and he used it to mistreat other people. So when there was the changing of guards and there was less people in the building, he would go out into Shrewsbury and he would charm young women. He would tell them about how he had all this power and this might at the castle, and he would charm them with ale and to come back to the castle with him. And when he was alone with these women, he would brutally murder them and dismember them, leaving parts of the bodies all over Shrewsbury. Often they would end up either getting fed to the pigs or down in the River Severn. And he'd do this, but take very grisly trophies. It was said that he would take the women's fingers and the women's toes. And Jack managed to do this 7 times without getting caught. 7 times he took a young woman's life and disposed of her remains quite cruelly. However, it was the 8th time that was to be Jack's downfall. So one evening, Jack went into Shrewsbury, all the guards had gone, and he charmed this woman known only as Annie. Now, Annie was very young, very naive. She was still in her teens, late teens, and she very quickly fell for this charming, dashing soldier. And she listened to him and he said, you know, come to the castle with me, but whatever you do, don't tell a soul, don't tell anyone where you're going, just come with me. So he actually got her to come to the castle, but before she came, Annie had actually told her sister. She wasn't very good at keeping secrets, and she was so in awe with this wonderful, wonderful man that she told her sister all about it. So when Anne didn't come back, when Anne didn't come back, her sister was very aware of what happened. She knew she'd gone to the castle, so she knew if she went to the castle, she might find her sister. So she goes through Shrewsbury, walks up to the castle, and she sees what no person should see. She sees her sister being dragged by the hair across the castle grounds, up the stairs to Jack's room. Now, she has a very difficult decision. She knows she's a woman. She knows that she's not physically able to stop him. So she realizes her best bet is to go into the town and get help. So she leaves the scene. She goes into town, panic-stricken, but then she realizes no one's going to listen to her. She's a woman, and this is a very, very important man from the castle. So she leaves it a couple of days and she realizes she needs to get evidence. She knows her sister's gone now. She realizes the only way she can stop this man is to get evidence. So she goes back to the castle and she speaks to one of the guards who were there, and she charms him a little bit, and she gives him a bit of the eye and says, oh, you know, a couple of days ago I came to the castle and I had a bit of a dalliance with one of the soldiers, but I left something in his room. And these men, they fall for it, and they go, yeah, of course, it sounds like Jack will take you up to his room. Jack isn't at the castle. This is one of the rare times he's not actually there. And they take her up to his room, and she finds in his room this box. She opens the box and she finds 8 rows of fingers and 8 rows of toes. So she screams, and the men are shocked and appalled by what's happened. And they manage to actually take this to the officials in the town, and they put a stop to Bloody Jack. Bloody Jack is he's hung, and his body is cast away over all of Shrewsbury, just like his victims. And it said that his remains were meant to have been put in the River Severn, and they put a stop to him. However, Jack's ghost is said to still haunt the building. You said to hear blood-curdling screams and very low groans, and there's even been full-bodied apparitions of him walking through the castle or dragging a unknown figure with him. I think this story is so important for so many reasons. It's a great bit of entertainment. It's got all those grisly, gruesome parts that make it fascinating. But it also it demonstrates people's attitudes during the time to this kind of military area, this military zone that Shrewsbury was. The men that would come into Shrewsbury Castle would be from far afield. They'd be from all over the area. They'd be even as far afield as London, or up north. They were from all over the country. And I think this story serves as a way to frighten young girls, to control their behavior and their morals and their sexuality. It's to say, you don't go to the castle and you talk to those strange men, because something bad will happen to you. And in a way, Bloody Jack becomes a boogeyman. He becomes a embodiment of male violence. Perhaps a similar crime did happen, we don't know. However, this story continues because so many people believe it's worthy to be told. And you'll see that with all of the stories that I'm going to tell today, is that they have endured because of their importance to the group that tell that story. So I want to move on now down the river, actually, to Iron Bridge, near my neck of the woods, and tell you a ghost story that symbolises another very dark period of our history, the ghost barge of the River Severn. So the River Severn runs all the way through Iron Bridge, and it's the industrial heartland, really, of Shropshire. It's on the East Shropshire coalfield. And the Iron Bridge is a iron bridge. It's a monument to the ingenuity of the men of the gorge, who actually built the first bridge made out of iron in the whole world, which arguably, depending on who you speak to, started the Industrial Revolution. And it's not it's worthy of mentioning that during the Industrial Revolution, the whole area was said to glow like the pits of hell. And interestingly, there's a lot, as we'll see in a little bit, a lot of devil folklore associated with that area. So perhaps it's a nod to the industry. However, the ghost barge comes from a time pre-Industrial Revolution. And it's said to be a barge, a big boat, a vessel that sails gently down the River Severn underneath the Iron Bridge, and then it's said to disappear. And on this barge, there is a very, very gruesome cargo. This barge carries a consignment of corpses piled row on row. And at the helm of the boat is an inhumanly tall boatman who is said to be clothed in black, almost rags, tattered rags, looking onwards and sailing towards down the river. And there have been a number of sightings of this. Apparently, even my grandfather said that he had seen it after a night shift, probably just because he was tired. But it is a very consistent haunting that kind of has its origins in the late 1600s, 1700s, and goes all the way through to today. But when the ghost barge disappears, it's not the end of the story, because down the river in a place called Jackfield, which also has satanic associations, it returns, and it's said to be parked up near the riverbed. If you do you park boats? Anyway, it was meant to be parked up near the riverbed, and it's empty this time. And people that have seen this ghost see that the corpses that were on the boat are now on the riverbed, and that bargeman is stood over them, watching them silently. Now, there's so much to unpack with this story. For a start, it's really, really metal. It's such a cool, almost, it's goth heaven, that story. The idea of this boat sailing down a river full of corpses. There's a nod to Greek mythology. But also, when you look at the history of the area, it unlocks a lot of the meaning of this story. So, the plague of the 1660s was particularly harsh to Shropshire. Historians estimate between 15 and 25% of the population died in the county. And before the roads were really standardised and made better, the main route to travel goods in and out of the county was down the River Severn. So the River Severn was the highway that travelled all the way down from Wales through to the coast. And you see a lot of trade in the area because of the River Severn. But also, one of the main ways to get the plague victims' bodies away from their home and to plague pits was by putting them on a barge and sailing them down the River Severn. And it gets even more interesting, because when you look into it a little bit more, there was a massive plague pit down in Jackfield. So we have a situation where we have this ghost that sails down the river and gets to Jackfield, and you have these corpses, these spectral corpses being taken to Jackfield, and they're following the same journey that conceivably they would have in life. And therefore, I think it would be very easy to say that there is a phantom boat that sails down the river, and that is a ghost and it's a real haunting, and it might very well be. But I believe that this story is a form of collective memory. This story continued to be told by the people that survived, the people that witnessed those boats go down the Severn. And even when the plague left the area and people recovered, those communities would never have recovered that loss of up to 25% of the people they knew gone. If you think about that, how in those small rural communities, there'd have been no one that wouldn't have lost someone. There'd have been no one that wouldn't have felt that pain, that grief. So I believe that even when the boats left the river, they continued to sail and continued to make that journey because of the people that had seen it, had dealt with it. And that story continues to be told because it's important. I think when something traumatic happens to a community, they can conjure a ghost and they create it in the image of their own fears. When you've lost someone from something as awful as the plague, that fear of illness, of sickness, of being on that journey down the river would never have left you. And I think because these stories have so much behind them and they can tell us so much about history, it's really important to look at ghosts as a historical entity, as an insight into working class, into rural kind of struggles and life in general. And some of these stories are a lot more easy to untangle than others. We know about the history of the ghost barge, so we're able to then link it to the past. But some of these fragments require a bit more pondering. So, for example, in St Lawrence's Church in Ludlow, there is an apparition that's said to appear at the dead of night. She's described as a tall, elderly woman who stands for a moment, and obviously you can see that she's dressed in black, almost like mourning wear. And then she turns around very quickly and she runs between the gravestones, runs around the church, screaming and howling almost inhumanly at the top of her voice. Now, my question is, what does she represent? Why is she remembered? There's a power in a haunting, and I think when we're given these fragments like that, it's definitely worth pondering why she's continued to be remembered. perhaps she is linked to a very tragic soul who lost their life, or someone's grief. There's so much within a haunting that we can learn. And if we stay in Ludlow now, there's another story that links to kind of that idea that trauma and negative emotions can cause the haunting to endure. So there's a pub called the Blue Boar in Ludlow, and it's got a number of hauntings, some of them not as tragic as others. So, for example, there's a 17th century cavalier that wanders around the pub apparently and pinches people's bums. There's another ghost that apparently just leaves old coins at the bar. And there's been a number of reports. I think the last one I read about was in like the 70s, of these old coins just being left at the bar by this spirit. However, there is one that is very linked to a tragedy from the building. And in the upper rooms of the Blue Boar, there is an elderly man who is said to be seen sitting and sobbing on a stool. He's holding a clay pipe. Now, the clay pipes were very, very linked to the area. And it's believed that he is the father of a girl who got pregnant out of wedlock. And unfortunately, she committed suicide in the building. And he was the father who couldn't help her, but he's lingered on due to his grief. I think this story, although it's a fragment, is so symbolic of the plight of women during the 18th and 19th, even into the 20th century, and the power of laws such as the Poor Laws or the Bastardy Clause of 1832 that made women's lives so much harder. And there's a number of examples throughout Shropshire of women that haunt because of the suffering they had in life. I want to move a little bit down the road now to a place called Rattling Hope, or Ratchup if you're a local. And it's a lovely little area. There's a whole bunch of folklore about sin eating in the area. The county's last sin eater is buried in Rattling Hope churchyard. But it's also home to, I think, one of my favourite ghost stories, and that's the Phantom Funeral. So the story says that a man was walking from his home to Rattling Hope to see relatives, and he took this journey a number of times. It's quite a twisting road over the Mind, but he'd done it a number of times. It didn't bother him, and he wasn't expecting anything really special to happen. So he starts off in his journey on a nice, bright, sunny day, which is very different to how it is in Wigan at the moment. And nothing really happens. He's listening to the birds, everything's fine. And all of a sudden, he starts to hear footsteps, and they get closer, and they seem to be going at quite a pace. And he turns round and he sees this beautiful, magnificent funeral and procession. The people are dressed in such finery, but very different to the area. The story is from the 19th century, but they're dressed almost in 16th, 17th, or 18th, depending on which version you see. So they're very out of place, these people, but they're in finery. They're silk and lace, top hats, and wonderful, wonderful outfits, and they're just staring on. They're ignoring him. They don't even see him. They nearly knock him off the road. There is a funeral carriage, a great oak coffin, and black horses at the front of the procession, and they just walk past him. But something about this funeral procession chills him to his core. It makes his heart skip a beat, his pulse quicken, and makes him feel panicked. So after it's past him, he lingers for a moment before continuing his journey. And he notices that this phantom funeral was heading the same way he was heading. So conceivably, it would be a notable person from the area, or someone very important and posh from the area. So when he gets there and speaks to his relatives, he asks them, who's died recently? And they kind of look at him a bit puzzled, and they say, well, no one's died. And he said, well, there was a phantom funeral. And this is when they look at him and quite nonchalantly just tell him that, oh, that'd be a ghost. There's always something to be seen up there. And that phrase, I think, is so indicative to Shropshire. There is something to be seen. And apart from it being in dialect, it's the idea that there is areas that are just haunted. There are areas that just permeate these ghost stories for whatever reason. Now, this man never found out why the phantom funeral was heading that way into Ratchup, but it stayed with him for the rest of his life. And he was said to even have dreams where he heard those hoofbeats still and heard that procession, and it really, really chilled him. And I think this is symbolic again of so many things. It is symbolic of the fear of death, the idea that death can catch you up on these lonely roads when you least expect it. And also the idea of being lost among the hills, being lost and not remembered. And all this links to these ghost stories. Now, one of the hardest things for me doing this today was trying to pick which stories to tell you from Shropshire, because we are so haunted. I know recently it said that Devon is one of the most haunted counties in the country, but I think Shropshire's creeping up. But I want to turn now to one of my favourite bits of folklore, and it's the folklore of Satan. Now, the devil is a very different beast to, no pun intended, in Shropshire, to more of those Judeo-Christian ideas. He feels older, darker, somehow more linked to the earth and more linked to us. In many ways, he's similar to kind of trickster gods like Loki, or that kind of idea of the trickster in Shropshire. And for whatever reason, he seems to have a real proclivity for the area. There is an absolute myriad of tales that are associated with Satan in the area. Now, there's that many tales that Shropshire folk in days gone by started giving him lovely little epithets and nicknames just to kind of rationalise he was always there. So some of my favourite is Old Scratch. There's no reason why he's Old Scratch, he's just Old Scratch. And then there's another one that refers to Satan as Uncle Joseph. Now, I don't know why he's the uncle. I don't know why he's called Joseph, but there are several mentions of Satan being referred to as Uncle Joseph. There are a number of theories as to why there is such a satanic influence in Shropshire. Perhaps he really is there, and in times gone by, everyone was just a Satanist in Shropshire. You never know. It could be the Methodist influence in the county that kind of came out in the 19th century. It could symbolise the religious turmoil of the dissolution and the Civil War. Perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, it could harken back to the industrial landscape, that movement from a very rural continuity to hell on earth, as Coalbrook Dale was described. Whatever the reason for Satan being in Shropshire, his stories are really worthy of discussion, because not only are they entertaining and interesting and wonderful, they can give us an insight, like the ghost stories, into the mindset of our ancestors or the people that came before us in Shropshire. I'm not going to be able to cover every ghost story in, not ghost story, a devil story in Shropshire today, but I'm going to pick some of my favourite ones. So the first one refers to a road that runs between Acton Burnell and Cardington, and this road is known as the Devil's Causeway. And it's said that the devil made this road in a single night. He laid it out himself, and he was very proud of his handiwork. He was very proud of the fact that he built this road in one night, so he decided to stick around. And it's said that he stalks this road of a night time, and he's often in a very human form, but he has cloven hooves. He's quite tall, and sometimes he has horns, but not always. And on this road, it's said that if you take this pathway of a night time, you will encounter the devil. And if you're a good person with a good soul, you will probably be roughed up a little bit, and he'll threaten you and, you know, scare you a little bit, but he'll send you unheeded. You won't be messed with, and you'll be allowed to continue your journey. However, if you're a bad or wicked person, the devil will beat you to a bloody pulp and leave you for dead on the road. Now, this story is fascinating to me because it's so multifaceted. you've got the devil being this big scary figure with horns and hooves, but he's a moralizing force, and he's also an executor of justice in the area. He's not, it's almost been flipped on its side. There isn't the idea of the devil taking the bad guy and giving him a pat on the back and going, well done for being evil, go and do some more evil. He's beating them to a bloody pulp. He's doing God's work and letting the good live and the bad be punished. And it's a really interesting idea, and a reversal of some of the Judeo-Christian ideas of the devil. In this story, the devil is almost encouraging you to be good. It's also symbolic of a lot of the fears of being caught out late at night in roads and in the darkness of the night. And in a lot of Shropshire, it was very warranted. So in a lot of Shropshire during the medieval period and going through into the 1600s, even the 1700s, there was whole areas that were rife with bandits and violence and robbers. Presthope on Wenlock Edge is one of them. And if you got caught out on some of these roads, you would likely lose your life. And I think that that's where some of the origins of this story comes from. It's the idea that a crime might have happened that was so horrible that it could only be the devil that made it happen. And I just think it's wonderful that the devil is so strong he can beat someone to a pulp. So I want to move on now, down back to Jackfield, to tell you a story of the devil's Christmas. So as in a way, it's almost the devil's Christmas party. So there is a pub called the Boat Inn at Jackfield, and it's a wonderful pub, a lovely little place. It was my granddad's favourite, and he met the devil apparently, so perhaps there's a link. We'll get to that in the end if we have time. And one Christmas in 1897, everyone had finished work for the Christmas period, and they were in the pub drinking and making merry. And all of a sudden, the doors swung open, and this stranger walked in. Now, Jackfield was the sort of area where everybody knew everybody. They knew everyone. They knew everyone's business. So when this stranger walked in at night, they were really confused about who this fella was, and to make matters more confusing, he was dressed in, again, very strange finery. It didn't seem to fit. These were working men. They were used to having dirt and coal dust and muck on their faces and their hands. They'd never seen someone wear such silks and strange kind of costumes that didn't seem to fit. They seemed to be from a forgotten era or just from another time. So this stranger, he goes straight to the bar and he gets himself a drink. And he starts to chat up the landlady and the bar ladies, and they're giggling, and he's got a bit of a charm. And then, after he's got his drink and he's finished with the ladies, he starts going round the building and talking to the men and asking them to play cards with him. And he says that he'll give them whatever they want. He will give them whatever promise or whatever they want if they can beat him at cards. So a lot of these men, they've had ale to kind of cure their inhibitions. They actually go and start gambling with the devil, and they lose. So he starts asking other men, and eventually everyone in the pub has lost to him, except for the blacksmith, who's quietly trying to enjoy his pint. He doesn't want to gamble. He doesn't want anything to do with this weird bloke that's just walked in. But eventually the devil comes over to him and he says, look, I can give you whatever you want. I can make your furnace so hot and your forge so hot that you'll never, ever have to worry. You'll be able to make the best steel. And the blacksmith's not for it, really. But to shut him up, he goes, all right, yeah, I'll play cards with you. And he thinks that if he can just shut this fella up, or he can distract him, then he'll go away, because he's doing his head in. So he sits down to play cards, and all of a sudden he drops one. He's shuffling and he drops one. So he bends down to pick it up, and to his horror, the stranger has a pair of cloven hooves. So as the blacksmith looks at the man, this stranger who he now realizes is the devil, the doors swing open and a great gust of wind carries the stranger out. as he's laughing maniacally and chanting curses. Brilliant story, absolutely 10 out of 10 for imagination. But I think if you break this story down, there's actually a very powerful message behind it, and it's not that the devil is having his Christmas too. In the Ironbridge area and Madeley, Jackfield, there was a movement in the 1800s to the idea of teetotalism that was kind of pushed forward by the Methodist community in the area. And if you think about it, this story really links to that idea. It links to the idea that drinking lets the devil in. These men were in the pub of a night time enjoying themselves when the devil literally walked into their pub. It's emphasizing that drink causes issues, and it therefore I think it's also linked to the idea of the fear of working class families, the idea that the husband would drink and gamble their money away and they wouldn't have enough to live on. And I think in that case it's a very powerful story, and it's very, very links to that idea of these darker folklore emphasizing the worries or the fears of a community, and the devil therefore has took his throne back as the tempter. And we're seeing a multifaceted links to the devil. We're seeing lots of different sides to him. However, the jewel in Shropshire's crown for devil folklore is the Stiper Stones and the Devil's Chair. It is a wonderful, wonderful area that's so rich in such a complete corpus of satanic folklore. And it's said that the Stiper Stones and the Devil's Chair was actually started by Satan. Satan himself created that area. So one day he was walking back from Ireland. Why he was in Ireland, we're never told, with an apron full of stones. Now, his plan was that he was going to get to Shropshire through Wales, and he was going to flood the River Severn, and it would drown the whole awful county, and he could be peaceful and he wouldn't have to worry about the county. Because depending on who you speak to, Satan either loves Shropshire or absolutely hates it and wants to destroy it. But in this story, he wants to destroy Shropshire. So he's walking through Wales and he's getting a bit tired. He's not quite as strong as he used to be. This journey a few years back would have been fine, but he's starting to ache in the places he used to play, and he's just feeling really tired. And eventually he gets over one hill and he sees another hill and starts his journey, but the apron strings snap, and those stones that he's carried all that way from Ireland scatter, and they actually become the Stiper Stones and the Devil's Chair. And it's said that to this day he jumps up and down on those stones, trying to push them back to the earth because they remind him of his failure. And it's said that if he succeeds in pushing these stones to the earth, England will fall. So if everything starts to go even worse in England than it's already going, and things get a little bit worse, we need to look at the Stiper Stones to see if they're still there, because it's a sign that England will fall if the devil pushes them down. Now, there are other stories about the Devil's Chair, and one suggests that he uses it very much as that, as a chair, and he sits on his throne and looks out over the whole of Shropshire into the wider country, and keeps an eye on his people and his wicked, evil folk. Also, it's said that if you spend a night at the Devil's Chair, you will either come back inspired or entirely insane. I've not tried it, but I would love to see what happened. Who knows? As well as that, every Friday night, witches are said to move from all over Shropshire and come to the Stiper Stones, up to the Devil's Chair, and use the area as a base for their planning and their get-together, their chatting, and also to plan what evil they're going to do for the week. I've not been again on a Friday, but I would love to. As well as that, on the Feast of St. Thomas, it's meant to be a gathering area for spirits and ghosts. So the ghosts that aren't linked to a particular area, those wandering revenants and spirits that have no place, they ascend to the Stiper Stones and they haunt the area. If that's not enough, on the longest night of the year, in December, it is meant to be the site of the most important Black Mass of the year. It's said to be when all the wickedest folk in the county, and even some from over the border in Wales, ascend to the area and rise up to the devil's chair, and they participate in this Black Mass. It is a time when Satan pledges gifts to them and rewards them for their behavior, but also when they make pledges to Satan. So if you want to sell your soul to Satan, you want to be going up to the Stiper Stones on the longest night of the year. And it's also a time when the wickedest, the king of evil or queen, is picked for that year, and they will be lauded above all. They will be Satan's favorite in that area. And I think this is such a developed folklore. You have one place, one rock formation that has so many associations with Satan. I think it demonstrates the fears of a community. It demonstrates the unexplainable, the untamed forces of nature and nature's destructive power. When rain and wind lashes across the Stiper Stones, it's meant to be a symbol that the devil is angry. And I think it also represents the things that are at odds with the light. Shropshire's dark folklore sings the songs of the ordinary people, their fears, their isolation, the things that they've endured, and also how they understood the world around them. And I think that's what makes it such a human, wonderful thing. And that I really hope that you enjoyed listening. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Anne-Marie and myself, we've done ghost walks around Jackfield, haven't we?
Oh, have you?
Yeah, we got some really good results, didn't we?
Did you? That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, we definitely did. And Jackfield, as you said, Amy, is just like a minefield, literally, of all sorts of hauntings. But the one that we liked best was the ghost in the back passage, which can take that as you mean. But we literally had some ghost hunters who came with us into the Moors Craft Centre, and they got sort of all of their equipment out and everything, and we all sort of like were going around following them. The readings went off the scale when we walked down this back passage in Moors Craft Centre in Jackfield. So be scared of the devil or the ghost in the back passage.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Has anyone got any questions or anything they'd like to put to Amy?
Think where it says
I was just sorry.
Yeah.
it's Natalie.
Yeah.
I was going to say thank you. That was just so entertaining.
Oh, thank you.
It really was. I wondered if you have a favourite of all the. I mean, I know that's really hard, but of all the folklore and ghost stories of Shropshire, is there one that you just keep coming back to time and time again?
Oh, so other than Satan, because I love Satan, don't tell the school I work in because it's a Catholic school, but I love Satan. And my favourite is a little area known as East Hope. And it's on Wenlock Edge, and it's the burly fighting monks of East Hope. Now, just the fact they're referred to as burly fighting monks makes you think of like World's Strongest Men, but in cassocks. It's brilliant. And these monks were said to be they were said to live at Wenlock Abbey, and they were monks there, and they weren't exactly there because they were religious and they were dedicated to God. They were there because they'd been in a bit of trouble and they knew that they could hide in the monastery. But they actually managed to get quite a cushy job where they would go around collecting the taxes for the area. And because these men were, as I said, not very religious. They were into some of the carnal sins of life, like drinking, gambling, wild women. What they would do is they would go around the different areas, and they would so they would charge the people the tax, but then take a little bit extra, and then they would use that money to enjoy themselves. But these two blokes didn't really get on that well. So often when they'd had a bit of ale, they would have a fight. They would verbally, and they'd end up getting split up by locals. And it said that one time they came to East Hope drunk too much, and the one chap wanted to spend more money. He said, well, let's just take the tax money, it's fine, the abbot will understand, we'll make up that we've been robbed. The other guy had a shred of decency, and he's like, no, we can't do that, we need to take some money, we've got a good gig going on here, we can't let them find out. So it descended into an argument, and then it descended into violence, and they started beating each other up, and they were throwing fists with reckless abandon. They were really, really knocking seven bells out of each other, to put it bluntly. And so much so that the locals were like, I don't really want to get involved, let's leave them to it. But unfortunately, they were fighting near a flight of stairs. So these two monks are said to have tumbled down the flight of stairs, both hit their heads and dead on impact. And most interestingly is they're buried in East Hope churchyard. And there's two stone slabs, and one has a big crack in it. And they're said to still haunt the area as they did in life, in their final moments, punching and kicking and ripping chunks out of each other. And interestingly, I found out some of my relatives are buried there. So I love the idea of them having a front row seat to that fight. So that one, everything about it I love. And also it's a really interesting comment on the clergy and the religious communities at the time, because this is very much a medieval story in origin, or at least it invokes the medieval period. However, it's very critical of the institution of the church. And in many ways, it kind of links to the attitudes that led to the dissolution of the monasteries. It links to that idea of clerical greed and of immorality within the church. And I think you can look at this story on a very high level of, oh, look at this symbolism, but also it's funny because they're burly monks. So yeah.
Got a couple of questions for you, Amy. Someone wants to know if there is any documentary evidence of the activities of Bloody Jack, because it's the first time they've heard of the man. And is there a Shropshire Devil folktale book that can be bought, or a website? I think your blog post tells a lot of ghost stories, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And also, what are your sources for the stories?
Awesome. So I'll start with the sources. So as it says in the comments, A Sheaf of Gleanings, Shropshire Folklore by Charlotte Byrne is the Bible. My copy is falling apart because she's done a wonderful job. There is always that idea of what did she leave out, what did she deem that wasn't quite suitable to put in, but it's one of the best sources we have. I find as well a great source of ghost lore and things that link to the folklore and ghost stories are actually the newspapers. So I am on the British newspaper archives, and there is such a wonderful source of ghost stories and apparitions and sightings and things like that. They're just reported in the newspaper. So a lot of my research about Nanny Morgan as well, Shropshire Witch, actually comes from the newspapers at the time. So I don't know whether there was a lot of slow news days in the 1900s, but there is a plethora of ghost stories that are either linked to established stories we already know. For example, a lot of Lilleshall Abbey's folklore is reported in tidbits in the newspapers from the era. Or stuff that's just been reported as being, look at this really weird thing that happened. So for instance, in kind of the Oswestry Way, Western Rin, there was a couple that bought a house. They rented it. They didn't buy it. They rented a house, And in the morning, the woman went down to stoke the fire, and this spirit in a floppy hat with a massive grinning smile just stood in front of her grinning. And a little Jack Russell Terrier, bless him, was barking and trying to scare the ghost away. And she obviously took a fright. She's a woman from the past, so she faints when she gets upstairs, and the poor little dog faints too. And all this is reported in the newspapers. And it's just such a wonderful little story that is a resource for someone like me that's obsessed with Shropshire ghosts. As well as that, you can get a lot in kind of like archives and also oral histories and oral stories. So some of the best ghost stories of people I've spoken to in the pub in Shropshire, that older people, or my grandfather was very well versed in a lot of our stories, and he actually brought me up on folklore before I knew really that I was doing about folklore. So there's lots of areas you can find, and there's some really good books that have been written as well about the subject of ghosts and things. But yeah, that's kind of my main area of research. With regard to the reports of Bloody Jack, I've not heard any modern ones, which is unfortunate really. There was an American in the 90s that came over and saw this big figure dragging someone, and he was very alarmed because, you know, that's not the sort of thing you see at a castle, and he reported it to the staff there. And there's been some written in The Ghosts of Shropshire by, I think it's Scott Davis. He refers to some evidence of it. But other than that, it seems to have been consistently reported, but very sporadically. And a lot of people have said that they've heard things as well, because it's a dual kind of manifestation. It's the hearing of the screams or the growls, as well as the visuals. The other question, what was the other question? Sorry.
Is there a, I'm just scrolling through, hang on a sec. Is there a devil folktale book? We've done that. I think that was it. Evidence of Bloody Jack. What are your sources, and are there any books?
So with regard to specifically the devil, there isn't one that specifically has just devil folklore. I'm wanting to write that when I get round to it. I keep meaning to. I do want to write a book about the devil folklore in Shropshire, because it is so developed, and it's very, very very prevalent in, and very, very highly concentrated. And I have a personal link to the devil folklore, because my grandfather said that he actually met the devil, which is always a conversation starter. So when he was a boy, he lived down in Ironbridge, and he hated church, didn't see the point of it. He'd rather be out doing practical things than going to church. And apparently my great grandmother was a bit of a gossip and a bit of a talk. So an hour at church turned out to be more like 3 hours. So one Sunday he got his cousins together and his friends, and he said, "You know what? We're not gonna go to church. We're gonna sneak out. Mum won't notice. Your mum won't notice because she's just as much of a gossip. We'll sneak out and we'll have some games. You bring a set of cards. You bring something else, and we'll sneak out." And it's St Luke's Church down in Ironbridge. You know, those steps that come all the way down. So that Sunday came around, and however they managed to do it, they did it, and they snuck out of church, and they started to play cards. And apparently, according to my grandfather, it suddenly got very cold, and he felt an icy hand reach his shoulder. And it really annoys me he never described him, because obviously he didn't realise I'd become a folklorist and be into this kind of thing. But he said he turned round and the devil was there. And he said that he stared directly into the devil's eyes, and the devil told him in no uncertain terms that if he continued to behave in such a way, and he continued to play cards on a Sunday and disrespect God, he would be seeing a lot more of him, and he'd end up in the other place. And there, you even within my granddad's story, you've got the idea of the devil being a moralizing force, the devil going, you better behave, otherwise you'll end up with me. And I asked him, obviously, when he used to tell me, because he wouldn't let us play anything on a Sunday, he wouldn't let us play games or what have you. And I'd say, well, you know, wasn't it just a local, or was it, you know, was it the vicar or someone your mum knew? And he said in no uncertain terms that if it would have been a local, he'd have got a clip round the ear and dragged into the church. So he, for whatever reason, believed he'd met the devil. So I've been very, very interested in that kind of folklore since, and hopefully I will eventually write that book with Shropshire's Devil Folklore, with a Lawrence Beach's story in it too.
Definitely. Going back to the beginning, when we were talking about Cherbury, Anne-Marie said that she did the Cherbury walk last year. So do you want to share that?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we did that. We did the going round the church widdershins 12 times at midnight. But all we actually got was a load of cows mooing. Tried to get a name out of them, but they wouldn't give us anything. But again, such a lot of folklore just around Cherbury, and so scary, really, the whole sort of area. You know, like you said, Amy, Shropshire, the borders, absolutely full of this kind of story.
If we're to believe Charlotte Byrne as well, the sign of cows lowing is a death token. So perhaps it did let you know that death was happening. They'd just not decided who yet.
I did actually consider that, decided to ignore that side of things. Shall I say? I'm still here to tell the tale anyway.
Yes, that's good. That's really good. We had I live in Wigan at the moment, and we had a raven out of the blue. There's very few ravens I've ever seen in Wigan. We had a raven just come at the window and just stand looking at me and my partner through the window. And I'd just been posting about how a raven is a death omen, and I was like, nope, I'm ignoring you. You're not you're not bringing me the death omen. I'd rather you be the All Father than anything to do with what I've just posted. So hopefully I'll still live to tell the tale.
Amy, it's Natalie. I did the ritual, the Halloween see your husband ritual when I was a teenager. So I'd come across it in a book, but my mum's from Staffordshire and she knew the Shropshire version. So I had a candle in midnight in front of the mirror, brushing my hair with one hand, eating the apple with the other. I was absolutely terrified. I was 13. I didn't tell my mum I was doing it. I just asked her about it and then stayed up really late. That was the bit that was really hard for me at that age, was the being able to stay up until midnight. I found that really hard. But yeah, I didn't see anything through the mirror, but I took my glasses off on purpose because I was terrified. But then I realised that I could see my bed. And on my bed, there was a copy of Smash Hits. And on the front of Smash Hits was Rick Astley. But I never married Rick Astley, so
he doesn't know what he's missing.
And I never liked Rick Astley either. So if it had been Morton Harkett from Aha, or I would have been like very pleased. But yeah, but no, it was a great thing to do. And I, you know, like I say, I was really nervous about doing it, but I was really glad. Now, that book I had also told the Shropshire story. So I'm wondering if I'd got it out from the library. It was a very old book, but I'm wondering if it is the Shropshire Folklore book that for some reason was in the library down in Newquay. Because the next one was your church story about the list of people that are going to die story in it, because obviously I was looking at Halloween rituals. So yeah, really, really interesting. All the way down in Cornwall, and that was what I was reading from the local library occult section.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. You never know, do you? I think there's the biggest link between kind of Cornwall and Shropshire that I found is the giants. We've got loads of giants in Shropshire, which unfortunately are all, for some reason, we decide that they're Welsh giants, which I don't know whether it's a sly dig over the border or what have you. But so we've got a lot of giant folklore. So that's the only link I can find, but doesn't really link to Halloween rituals. So I don't know.
Can I just butt in? I just saw one of the things in the chat, which was asking about an audio book version of the Shropshire Folklore. our community group Folk has been looking into this and whether we'll ever be able to achieve funding to do that. But obviously we'll let you know, but it's something that we've been looking at for quite a long time. So we're really keen to share really the words of Charlotte Byrne, and you know, sort of like she was the first president of the the Folklore Society, I should say. And it was like a really big deal for a woman to actually achieve that. And that book actually set the standard for all folklore books that then went from it. So it really was, you know, sort of a really important document, a really important book that then sort of like set the trend for all of the other counties. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt there, but I just thought it was worth, you know, mentioning that.
Oh no, it'd be wonderful that. And definitely all hail Charlotte Byrne. She's queen, absolute queen in my, I'm not worthy. Yeah. Does anyone have any more questions or anything?
Amy, do you want to just give us what your blog's called so people can look at it and read some more stories?
Yeah, so it's Nearly Knowledgeable. So it's Nearly Knowledgeable History at blogspot.com. And it links. I do a lot of ghost stuff. I do some history. There are some kind of local history of the area, particularly Coalbrookdale, Jackfield, that kind of area, and lots of stuff about Satan, because I do love satanic folklore. And yes, it's there. And thank you for saying it's a brilliant blog. It really means a lot to me. When I first started writing it, I said to my partner, I was like, oh, it would be great if maybe 10 or 20 people looked at it, and then I left it. And the fact that people continue to like look and listen and are interested in what I have to say is just, it's amazing.
Suzanne wants to know, have you heard of the Devil's Mouthpiece?
I have, but I don't know enough about it to discuss it. So if Suzanne would like to add anything, I've heard of it, but it's in my list of things to kind of look into. So if she'd like to let me know, let us know about it, I'm more than happy to hand over.
Okay. Anyone else got a question? No. I think that's it, Amy. Thank you so much. It's been really, really interesting. It's quite dark, isn't it, really, Shropshire? It's quite dark. But thank you to everyone for coming today and taking part in this Zoom session. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be putting the final recorded onto our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to catch up again. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming. It's really made my day. People want to listen. Thank you.